And we're going to be looking at some of my favorite verses in the book of Proverbs. There are a few sections in the book of Proverbs that get my attention and that I really, really like. Last chapter was chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Those are some of my favorite verses. But here in chapter 4, and beginning in verse 23 of chapter 4 Proverbs, God says, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from thee. Let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand, nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil." Years ago, there was an old radio program. Some of you older folks might remember this. It began with a mysterious, echoing voice. And it went kind of like this. Sanctum, dum, dum, dum. Inner sanctum. Anybody remember that? Okay, a few of you do. I don't. But I've heard about it, and I've heard that beginning of that radio program. Inner sanctum. Your secret self. The part, the place, the area of your life that nobody but you knows about. It's where your character is formed. Your inner thoughts that make you, you. Your inner sanctum is what the Bible calls your heart. And that is the place where no one else is allowed. And concerning that special place, that inner sanctum, your heart, it says that you must keep, protect is the idea there, your heart with all diligence. And that means that it has to be a very, very important place, right? If God says to protect it with everything you have, that's pretty important. Certainly the importance of the inner sanctum can't be underestimated. It is where the outpourings of life are. Notice what it says there, that for out of it are the issues of life. That analogy there, or the image, is one of a spring of water coming up, and then the rivulets of the water go off in different directions. You know, one channel goes this way and another goes that way. That's the idea, is that the water flows in all different directions from that stream, if you will, or that spring. The word in Hebrew, meaning issues, or translated issues, means goings forth, the outgoings of life. Everything starts from there. Your personality, your actions, your character, the outflow of your life. Sometimes people say, well, my problem is I've made a lot of bad decisions. Probably not. I mean, not saying they weren't bad decisions, but there was something else in front of those decisions. There was something deeper than those decisions, out of which those decisions flowed. The inner sanctum is where your character is born. Criminals are born in the inner sanctum. Charles Manson, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Bonnie and Clyde, Marilyn Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer. They didn't just suddenly decide to turn into those people that ended up being of bad character. The list could go on and on of people that we know of, either from celebrities that have really made some incredible messes out of their lives, or whoever it might be. They didn't just magically turn into those people. That started a long time before, and I can tell you where it started. It started in the inner sanctum. Started in the heart. Conversely, great men and women are born in the inner sanctum. Abe Lincoln. There's a story about him, and I believe this is a true story, that about him walking several miles to return a few pennies that someone had overpaid him. You say, well, that's a great story. Well, it is, but it's an inner sanctum story. You see, that which he did flowed out of his inner sanctum, his heart. Charles Spurgeon, David Livingstone, Amy Carmichael, the great missionary, others that you might think of that lived impactful and profound lives didn't just magically become those people. It started. It started in the inner sanctum. That's where your personality is formed. Bitterness is stored in the inner sanctum. Hostility is stored there. Dreams and goals are stored there. It is an important place. You become what your inner sanctum is. The inner sanctum is where repentance happens. It is where God works. When God begins to deal with somebody, he deals with them in their heart in conviction of sin and drawing them to a saving knowledge of Christ. The inner sanctum, God says here in verse 23, it is the starting point of the activities of life. Out of it are the issues, everything that comes forth, out of the heart are the issues of life. So he says to keep this, and that word keep is a security word. And so he begins to talk about the security of the inner sanctum. This is something that you need to guard, which is what that word keep means. Now we know what it means when we are keeping our physical bodies, right, our physical lives. We don't willy-nilly just cross US 12, at least I don't. When I go out to get the mail, I'm looking both ways. And then timing myself if my little feet can run fast enough across there and hopefully gauging how fast the cars are going on either side. That is a desire to keep my physical self secure. I'm watching out. Hopefully when you're out driving, you're being careful and watching when you're driving. We are to keep our physical lives. We don't have trouble remembering that, taking precautions. When it comes to protecting our things, we lock the car, or at least we lock the car. We lock the house at night. I am understanding that some people around here don't, which maybe it was our Detroit experience, but we never had to be convinced to lock the house, no matter where we lived. At the Women and Teens Center in Pontiac, now called Next Step, to say that was in a bad neighborhood is an understatement. When we were first shown that building, they took us down, the people that owned it took us down, and we went in that building, and there were drug addicts living in the building at the time we went in. And they had cranked the heat up. They had radiator heat in that building, and they were cooking their food. They had cranked it as high up as they possibly could so they could cook their food in cans on top of the radiator. There were, I want to say 5 in there. There was one guy asleep up in the closet, and 2 or 3 people cooking food in the living room area on the radiator. And we walk in there, and they look at us, and we looked at them, and I got on the phone, and you know, the nice thing about it was that they were doing a drug raid only about a block away from us. And so the police were there within like 3 minutes. And isn't it a lucky thing when they're doing drug raids right in your neighborhood? So anyway, they were right there, and they hauled. I remember it was a very cold day, and one of these people that was in there, they had already grabbed her and put her in the police car. And I walked out. They wanted me to identify her, so I walked out, and she's in the car. She's going, "Yeah, it's me," because she wanted to go to jail where she could have a warm place in three squares. So I'll never forget that. Yeah, I'm the one. So anyway, we took precautions. we put in motion lights, and because they were stealing the aluminum off the back of our building and selling it. And we would have been trying to get in to get the wiring if we had not taken steps. And but the point I'm getting is that that's security. We take steps, right, to protect our house. We take steps to protect ourselves. But I wonder how many steps we take, how many actions we take to keep the inner sanctum. Because he tells us to do this with all diligence. He gives us some clues about areas of our lives that we need to really pay attention to. And I think those are in verses 24 through 27. These are, I think, practical steps that we take to keep our inner sanctum. Notice what it says in verse 24. Put away from thee a froward mouth and perverse lips put far from thee. He deals here with what we talk about. Right after he warns us about the inner sanctum, he talks to us about the things that we say. You know, your speech is like, or your lips are like hands making things out of clay. You take a lump of wet clay and you form it and you make it into something, and you could make it into, well, I couldn't make it into something beautiful, but you might be able to make it into something beautiful, or you might make it into something ugly or even dangerous with your hands. Well, the lips are kind of like that because they take letters of the alphabet and make shapes from thoughts that we call words. And a froward mouth is a mouth that's speaking things that it ought not to be saying. And perverse lips, obviously, it's talking about things that shouldn't be talked about. You know, sometimes people say, well, I can't talk about it in mixed company. Probably you shouldn't talk about it. Or I can't tell this joke in mixed company or with kids around. Well, probably you shouldn't tell it. A froward mouth and perverse lips are not simply what you avoid that someone else is saying, but what you yourself says. Bad-mouthing others, gossip, venting negative and hateful thoughts corrupts the inner sanctum. You are giving life to thoughts. You need to regulate what you talk about. You can threaten your inner sanctum by the words that you allow to be formulated out of your thoughts. And then he says, you need to guard yourself from what is dangerous to see. Let thine eyes look right on, and thine eyelids look straight before thee. You need to be careful of what you look at. Things that are on the internet, for instance, you need to be careful about what you look at there. We have talked many times that the internet is a wonderful tool. I mean, it is fantastic. You can get information almost instantaneously when you want to know even how words are pronounced. You know, we did that the other night. I wonder how that's pronounced. So we Googled it, you know. How do you say this? And so, what was the word? Chimera. Chimera? C-H-I-M-E-R-A. They're making hybrid human monkey embryos, or trying to, or blending cells, and they're calling them chimera. What a thing. I'm not even sure how I got onto that. Guarding the internet, that's what. But there are things on the internet that are very bad and corrupting. Things on the television that are very bad and corrupting. He says you need to guard yourself from what it's dangerous to see. Let thine eyes look right on. Let thine eyelids look straight before thee. And then you need to be careful where you go. Look what he says in verse 26. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. He says, turn not to the right hand, nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. There's an old song, and I don't know that I have ever quoted Johnny Cash ever in any message. I can't remember if I did, but there's an old song that he used to sing. Can you guess what that is? I walk the line, you know. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. There's pretty good application right here in verses 26 and 27. Ponder the path of thy feet. Let your ways be established. Know which way you're going. Turn not to the right hand or to the left. Remove your foot from evil. You need to ponder the path of thy feet. Your inner sanctum is at risk. There were people, when our kids were growing up, kids in the neighborhood, that we did not allow our children to have unrestrained playtime with, or unmonitored playtime. In fact, with a couple of them, if they hung out with them too long, we could tell in the behavior of our children, things they talked about. That's a parent's job, by the way. But most of you are adults. A good share of you are. That means there's not parents telling you in regulating your life. You need to make those decisions about what you look at, what you say, and where you go. Ponder the path of your feet. Now, I want to share with you a few closing thoughts about the inner sanctum before we're done with this tonight. He says to guard it, and then he gives these action verses. You know, be careful what you say, careful what you look at, careful where you go. There is only one step between thinking and doing. Only one step. Many biblical examples. King Saul allowed bitterness and jealousy to enter his heart. And if you had asked him early on if he would ever have tried to kill David, he would have said, are you nuts? Are you crazy? If you'd asked him early on. But that's what happened. Tried to kill David. Many young women who had never thought of living with a guy and not be married gradually gave in to that idea. A respected man was caught trying to rob a bank. No one ever dreamed he would do such a thing. Caught everybody by surprise. But over time, as he walked past this bank every day on his way to work, just as he was walking past, he noticed one day that the money was brought in from an armored car at the same time every day with very little security. And he thought to himself, it sure would be easy for someone to rob that bank. And then he began to think over time as he went past that and noticed the same thing happening at exactly the same time every day. He began to think, well, even I could rob that bank. And gradually a plan began to form in his inner sanctum over a period of time until thought became reality, and he went to prison for trying to rob the bank. What you think, folks, can become reality. There have been many people who have asked themselves, how in the world did I ever get to this place in my life? I've had people say that to me several times over the course of my life. How in the world? I never would have dreamed I would have ended up in this position. Well, where did it start? I'll tell you where it started. It started in the inner sanctum. It started in the heart. What you think becomes reality. Hence, the issues of life, the outgoings of life. Only one step between thinking and doing. Second thing is that sinful thoughts, continually fostered, take the sting out of sin. There are some thoughts that enter into the inner sanctum, and you think to yourself, whoa, that's a terrible thing. And you deal with it right then. But maybe it comes in next time. Maybe it's a week. Maybe it's 2 weeks later. but then you don't deal with it. You don't cast that thought out. You let it linger a little bit. And then maybe you deal with it. But then over time, you get more and more used to thinking that particular way, that thinking about that prospect, thinking about that temptation. The more familiar you are with something, the less effect it has on you. Someone called it, and I've referenced it many times before, but it's called the law of diminishing returns. Or otherwise, the more you look at something ugly, the less ugly it becomes. Sinful thoughts continually fostered take the sting out of sin. Some years ago, I went into, myself and a deacon went in to visit a family. It was an older couple, and they had, I had never met them. I was a new pastor. This obviously wasn't here, but we had gone to visit these people. Well, I didn't know that they had monkeys in their, I'm talking about real monkeys, not just kids. Real monkeys as pets. And they had dogs as well. I cannot describe the stench in that home. And it was almost overwhelming. The guy I was with, I wasn't sure he was going to be able to contain himself, But I remember glancing and seeing manure behind the couch, dog manure. And then I remember smelling the stench. And now you would think, well, people who would be in that kind of a situation, they'd be dirty, filthy people. They weren't. But they had gotten used to that smell. The smell that my friend and I, it almost sickened us. They had gotten accustomed to it. How did that happen? How did it get that way? And here's the answer: gradually. How did they get used to it? Gradually. Sinful thoughts continually fostered take the sting out of sin. Thirdly, the inner sanctum is like a greenhouse. What you put there will grow. When he warns, keep your heart because of what comes out of it. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, finish the verse. Think on these things. Think on those things. Why think on those things? Because out of the heart proceed the issues of life. And if you are thinking on those kinds of things, the outcome is going to be good. If you're thinking on sinful, gross, grotesque, sensual things, those are the kinds of things that are going to grow in the inner sanctum. And then, as we close, I want to look back here at verse 23. Keep thy heart with all, what's the word? Diligence. That means that you don't just check it whenever you feel like it, or whenever you get around to it, or Sunday when you come to church. You don't just check it once a day. It means that you're monitoring the inner sanctum all the time. If somebody threatens to kill you, somebody's after you. And as someone said, it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. If somebody's after you, do you just kind of look outdoors once a day? Okay, 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to look out and see if anybody's out there. Is that what you do? That's good enough. It's once a day. No. If you know there's a threat, you are keeping frosty. I used to tell my children when they left and when we were in Detroit, stay frosty, stay alert, looking around. Be aware of what's going on around you. Know who's around you and what's going on. Check your inner sanctum every day, not just once in a while, but with all diligence. Clean house. When the kids were little, sometimes a baby bottle would come up missing. I don't know if that ever happened to you, but we would look for it for a few days, and then finally we'd find a half-full bottle. They ought to weaponize those things. You know, pull that. Boy, there's nothing that reeks worse. The longer they sit, the worse they are. Well, sin in the inner sanctum is like that. It's like rotting filth. Filth does not get better. So, friend, let me encourage you. Guard your inner sanctum. Keep it clean. Check it every day. How important it is to keep your heart, your inner sanctum, clean. But I will add this, many believers rarely do. Maturing believers always do, because they know that if they do not keep their heart, they will bring dishonor to the Lord and heartache to themselves. Some people's inner sanctum is all messed up. They've allowed a lot of bad things inside, but they don't have to stay there. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of Great Britain's sea captains, one of the most productive and most famous sea captains in the days of Queen Elizabeth I. He was a fearless adventurer, and he was a great favorite of the Queen. But he was not liked so much by her successor, James I. And in the end, the king condemned Sir Walter to death. The executioner, whose sympathy evidently was with the prisoner, had no joy in his task. Hoping to ease the sailor's last moments, the executioner told Sir Walter how to place his head on the block to ensure swift decapitation. Sir Walter Raleigh thanked him, but then said this: "It matters little, friend, whether or not the head is right, so long as the heart is right." The heart must be right if the life is to be right. The heart can be right only if it's cleansed by the precious blood of Christ and indwelt by the Spirit of God, and even then the heart must be kept with all diligence. It needs to be protected with all diligence. Father, thank you for our time together around your word. And I pray that if there's anyone here that has not been diligent about keeping their heart, about protecting the heart, maybe they've not been cautious about the words, the thoughts that they express in words. Maybe they have not been very fastidious about what they look at. And maybe they've made poor choices about where their feet lead them. I pray, Father, that you might help them to realize that the inner sanctum is crucial to be protected. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.